trade just-in-case learning for just-in-time learning. That is finding out what your next step is, whatever that next step might be, and finding the right resource at the right time for the right reasons, really.
We live in an age of endless information. From the moment we wake up until we go to bed at night, it's like living in a 24/7 buffet. We snack on podcasts and newsletters, gobble books and classes. And if you're in the midst of a career transition, you might be even more inclined to read, listen, and watch to get inspiration. All of this information consumption can feel comforting, just like it feels good to bite into a slice of hot pizza. It makes us feel like we're taking action towards our goals. But just like there's such a thing as eating too much pizza, and I know because I've done it, we can also overindulge on information. But instead of getting a stomachache, the information or compulsive learning becomes a barrier to action, avoiding the uncomfortable experience of plunging headlong into uncertainty. In this week's episode, Pat Flynn teaches us how to break free from the trap of endless information consumption without action. Pat Flynn is the founder of Smart Passive Income and best-selling author of Lean Learning. We talk about how to home in on one inspiration, how to align with your values, and why sometimes we all need a little push to get moving. Pat, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Happy to be here.
I'm going to be honest with you. When I first saw the title of your book, which is Lean Learning, How to Achieve More by Learning Less, I was pretty skeptical. I'm a big proponent of learning more, not less. But what I found that's so interesting is that you really aren't telling people not to learn, right? Just that there's a way to do it differently so that you don't allow information consumption to turn into a crutch or a trap that stops you from taking action towards your goals. So I'm curious, how can learning more information actually keep us in our comfort zone and away from taking action?
Yeah, it feels good to learn, right? We were taught from a young age that the more you know, the better off you would be, right? You were rewarded for being the smartest person in the class. You were even seen as higher class if you had an Encyclopedia Britannica in your home, right? So information was always synonymous with success. But times have changed, and we haven't evolved out of treating information almost like it's a scarce food source, right? Information was scarce and therefore it was valuable. But now we have access to everything we could ever need on our phones and with AI, and it's just accelerating even more. And if you think about like that analogy of food, right? Food and information are often synonymous, right? We consume information like we consume food. We digest information like we digest food. However, information is no longer scarce. We're at a buffet line. And there's so much of it, yet we're still treating it as it's scarce. We're hoarding it. And not only that, the problem also is a result of these platforms that we're on, right? When you start to get curious about something and you start typing it into YouTube, for example, the next time you come onto YouTube, you're fed 12 more videos about that thing. And then you're just deep in this rabbit hole. And you're not only at this buffet line filling your plate full because it feels good, you're getting force fed, right? So the hard thing is to know, well, which information is right and which one is wrong. Where do we take action? When do we stop learning? When do we start learning? This whole premise behind this book is to trade just-in-case learning, which is what we've all been doing, for just-in-time learning. That is finding out what your next step is, whatever that next step might be, and finding the right resource at the right time for the right reasons, really. Perhaps a clear example, maybe relatable to some people listening, is if you're in the car, a lot of us, especially us who are excited and curious, we put on a podcast. We're listening to an audiobook. We have to fill in that time with something, or else we feel like we're wasting our time. But you know what I've been doing lately that's been really amazing? I have been turning off the radio in the car and driving in silence. And it's weird. Number one, I'm like, oh, that's actually what my car sounds like. I didn't know that. Secondly, I'm able to think more deeply about things. I actually have time to myself. I can get creative during that time. It's why it's called shower thoughts, right? Because that's literally the only time we don't have anything else to do but think. And I think we need more of that in our life. So no, I'm not saying learning is bad, but Out of control learning without control is bad because there's so much coming at us that we can be pulled in every which way and really go nowhere.
And what strikes me too is you don't have the time to just sit with your own thoughts, as you're saying, and
Yeah.
think about what is it that I want to do? What is it that's interesting to me versus what are other people telling me that I should want and should be interested in? I'm curious, does anything come to mind recently that you've been able to have insight into or kind of think more creatively about because you had that blank space or that quiet time?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, number one, it's provided more time for me to think about other things that are important to me outside of business, like my family. I mean, my son is about to turn 16. My daughter just turned 13. I have two teenagers now, which is kind of insane. And without time to think about the future and kind of the few summers I have left with them, we wouldn't have been able to come up with plans for our upcoming breaks and summer and all those kinds of things to spend as much time with them because usually I'm on the go and on the go all the time. And I'm always thinking about, just the thing I'm doing today and tomorrow. But now that I have time to sit with myself, I can think about the future, or we can chat with each other. I can ask them questions about how they're feeling or what's exciting in their lives, as opposed to just let's absorb as much as possible. We just don't do that kind of thing anymore because we're always on the go. Everybody's doing their own thing, and either that or our eyes are down on a screen.
Well, it seems to me that what you're talking about here is also information and kind of mindless information consumption as a kind of distraction, right? From what's really important to us. There's a lot of comfort in feeling like, oh, if I just spend all my time reading newsletters, listening to podcasts, that I'm going to figure out the answer and I'm going to know what to do next. And so I'm curious, like, what's enough when it comes to the right level of information to know if you can move forward or if you can do something versus something that might just be a distraction or be kind of a crutch in the moment because you're afraid.
Right. It's similar to an artist painting on a canvas. How do you know when to take that last stroke and say it's done and then put it up there on the wall or put it out for sale? You have to eventually get to the point where you move forward. And so the hard thing to do is there's always so much more that you can learn. And we were trained as kids, to understand everything first before taking any action. But what's really interesting and maybe the sort of ironic thing is when you take action is when you learn more. I remember going to school for 5 years for architecture. And as great as that was from a prestigious college, I learned so much more in the first month of actually working at a firm on what was actually relevant for today versus these, in many cases, outdated practices. I was still drawing by hand at Berkeley, and nobody was doing that anymore. Everybody was using AutoCAD in 2005 when I got into the workforce. So, the more that you can just kind of put yourself and plant yourself in those situations where things actually are working and are moving, the quicker you're going to understand. And yes, the more mistakes you will make, but also the faster you will get up and move and transition and pivot into success. The faster you'll connect with other people who are going through it with you, the more likely you are to not try that thing again that didn't work the first time, right? There's only so much you can learn before you need to start taking action. And in many cases, out of all the information there is to know about something, you just need a single percentage point to then have enough to take that first step. And that's very difficult to do. We have this FOMO, right, of missing out on all the information that's out there. And with more and more information coming our way on these algorithms, we often get drawn to them. And so there's a discipline that has to happen in order to succeed. You have to kind of be okay of missing out on certain things and recommit to the things that you've already said yes to. At some point in time, there was a counter to FOMO called JOMO, right? Joy of missing out. And I never really believed that because it was almost fake. It's like, no, I'm not going to pretend like I'm joyful that I'm missing out on this information. That's not correct. I don't know if you've ever seen like Legally Blonde, but when Reese Witherspoon's character Elle is studying for the bar exam, like she wants to go to the parties that all of her friends are going to, but no, she's disciplined enough to sit down and study so she can go to Harvard and see her ex-boyfriend and kind of win him back. You have to do the same thing. So my advice would be JOOO, the joy of opting out, not missing out, but opting out. The discipline to say, yes, I see that. I see those things. I recognize it. Yes, that book looks amazing. Those podcasts sound like they would be great, but I already know what my next step is and I have to recommit to that. So I'm going to say no to that and I'm going to recommit to the yeses, because every yes you say to something is a no to something else that you've already once said yes to. So that, again, discipline is really, really key. My favorite strategy for finally taking action is actually using the calendar, saying on this date, I'm going to start. It happened when it almost acts as sort of a force function, a voluntary force function. When I learned how to speak, I wanted to learn how to speak for a very long time, but I always said no to things because I was afraid. I always could put things off till later. But when I finally said yes to my buddy's conference that he was putting together in 2011, there was a date that I was going to be on stage no matter what. And that forced me to learn in the quickest way possible. I found one resource called Stand and Deliver by Dale Carnegie. And that was the one book I was going to learn from to at least give my first best shot. It wasn't perfect. I made some mistakes, but I said, you know what? I'm going to keep getting better over time. And now I'm at a point where I've gotten paid over $500,000 in speaking fees. And to know that I had once been deathly afraid of that is insane. But it takes action to help you determine what to do next. A lot of people feel the mistakes that you make derail you, when in fact they become the guardrails that you can now work in between.
One of the other concepts that I love from your work is this idea of a junk spark. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what that is and why it's so important to watch out for, and particularly for folks that might be in the middle of these kind of work shifts and transitions.
Yes. So as much as getting overwhelmed by the amount of information available as possible, you can also get over-inspired. We often think inspiration is always good, but if you are inspired by one thing over here and you start kind of dabbling, but then the next day you are inspired over here because somebody else said something, because you're connected to them or because your algorithms showed it to you, you're now over here dabbling. And if you dabble everywhere, you're going to be at the surface everywhere and have zero depth and give nothing a chance to really succeed. And a junk spark is simply the most common thing that we all experience, right? Where we get excited about something for a short period of time, we dabble in it, and then we move on to the next junk spark, right? It's a spark, it's exciting, but it's junk because it doesn't really either align with where we want to go, or it's just another thing to add to the bin with nuts and bolts and other tools that like you kind of set aside for later because you've tried a whole bunch of different things. You have to have a period of time that you dedicate to these things to give things a shot. And that's where you can kind of transition out of junk spark and turn it into a possibility. And that's where you give it a certain amount of time to try something. You find the one resource to help you on that thing and implement it and take action and see a result. And it may or may not work out, but at least you've given it a shot. Case in point, recently I started to experiment on TikTok and Reels. I've never really been somebody who has succeeded on short form video. I've done long form video and done that very well, but short form was very foreign to me. But I really wanted to give it a shot. So I decided that for 60 days, I was going to do a daily short form video. And by the end of this daily 60-day experiment, I was going to assess whether or not it was something I should continue to do. Normally, I would dabble. I'd try it for a few days here and see no results, and I'd move forward. But you know what? That wasn't the goal. The goal was not actually even views. The goal is to get to day 60 because that's what I can control. I can control hitting publish and going for 60 days. So that's what I did. Now I got to day 30 and my views weren't really there. I was getting 300, maybe 1,000 views on a video, which in the grand scheme of things is not a lot. But again, that wasn't the goal. I needed to get to day 60, so I was okay. Normally, I would have given up, but a few things did happen. By day 30, my editing time for these daily short videos went from 1 hour to 12 minutes. I was able to drastically reduce the amount of time simply by just continually showing up and getting those reps in, learning the shortcuts, learning templates, and all these other things to make it easier and faster. Because I had to come out with it daily, I only had so much time to learn. I needed to actually execute. And again, that forced that learning to happen. In addition, on YouTube gives you a lot of data. I had 30 days worth of data by day 30 on what worked and what didn't. So I started to continue to hone in. And on day 35, one of those videos hit 750,000 views. It just exploded kind of seemingly out of nowhere, but it wasn't. It was a result of all the kind of things I've learned over time, and it finally kicked in. And now this channel, which I did continue because it was doing very well after 60 days, has now on YouTube over 2 million subscribers. It was brand new. And it's gaining across all platforms over 10 million views a day now, which is insane to think. It's the biggest thing I've ever done. And it's become a viral thing called Should I Open It or Should I Keep It Sealed? If anybody's ever seen any Pokemon cards open on their feeds, it's probably my video. But again, I learned as I went. I didn't try to learn everything and then kind of overwhelm myself with the process.
The part of learning that can be really challenging, but ultimately rewarding, which is that consistency over time, right? I want to talk a little bit about identity for a second, because you famously got laid off from your dream job as an architect many years ago. And now I would say you're kind of the architect of your own life, right? And you
Hmm.
provide frameworks to help millions of people. I'm curious, do you still identify as an architect, or how have you thought about your identity shifts and navigating that as your career has pivoted?
It was very difficult to know even who I was when all that transitioning was happening. When I got laid off, I mean, it was my dream job. That's all I knew. That's all I had prepared for. And then I discovered entrepreneurship, and that was exciting and interesting. And I started to climb that ladder too. And even after succeeding there, even after seeing a business in the architecture space, I helped architects pass a very specific exam. That was my first online business in '08. I was still going in for architecture jobs because I just, there was this almost like sunk cost. And I'm like, well, I went to school for 5 years for this. Like, that's what I should be doing, right? There's that sunk cost feeling, and I knew, and I've learned that that's a very dangerous thing, because it almost is like weight that can hold you back from this new thing. And for a while, it was almost as if I was climbing two ladders. I had one foot on the architecture ladder and another foot on this entrepreneurial ladder. And I saw the ladders, I looked up, and the entrepreneurial one was much higher. I could climb much, much higher if I wanted to, but it was so hard to climb because I was on two different ladders. And eventually I had to let go of who I thought I was supposed to be. So it's ironic because I was let go for my job, but I didn't really let go until later who I was going to be. And I don't regret doing architecture, even though I don't do it anymore. There are things within it that I still carry forward, like the importance of communication, clientele, building things, and then having people kind of then use it is really exciting to me. So in that way, it's still very similar, but obviously the mechanics of what I do are completely different. So the identity, I've had to learn, it's more than just about my job. I am an architect. I'm an entrepreneur. I think it's about what you stand for. That's who you are. Your values are the things that light you up and the things that you believe in, the things that you will fight for. And no matter if you are an employee or a boss of your own, it doesn't matter. Those values can carry forward within all of that, and you can be the same person. And I think it does take you understanding and maybe sitting in the car in silence a little bit to reflect on that truthfully. And then once you understand your values, especially if you're bringing yourself out there in the world as a personal brand, or even as somebody looking for a new job, when you understand your worth, your value, what you have to offer, and what you stand for, it's very much easier to attract people who understand you for that and be able to kind of work with you and collaborate with you in that regard. Your vibe attracts your tribe. And when you figure out what your vibe is, then so much things become much easier. So yeah, I'm not an architect. I'm, right now I'm a YouTuber, as my kids would say, because if you ask any kid, they all want to be YouTubers. But I'm a podcaster. I'm all kinds. I do a lot of things, but I know across all of that, I'm the same person. So understand your values. That's something that we don't get taught to do. You have to kind of figure it out. And hopefully this gives you some inspiration to do that.
There's no influencer out there who's going to tell you what your values are. You need that alone time to really think and reflect on that, and time away from kind of being bombarded with information all the time. I think it's
There will be
important.
influencers who would try to tell you those things and maybe even
Right.
sell you on those things. But that's a very personal thing that you and close people around you will have to have a discussion about.
So, from what I've learned about you and from this conversation so far, it sounds like one of your values is being there and being close to your family, right? Being a
Absolutely.
father. And what it's been like for you to continue to uphold that value and to kind of weave family time into your career, and advice that you have for people who might be struggling with this. Particularly, I think it's always challenging, but when you are figuring out what's next for you, or you're kind of in a stalled moment in your career, how do you continue to make time for both?
The calendar is a big part of that. To understand what's really important to somebody, in my opinion, all you have to do is look at their calendar. And you look at a lot of people's calendars and you'll see meetings and whatever for work, all these Zoom calls, things that have to get done, deadlines, and then you see nothing related to their family on there. Why is that? Is it because we're just using whatever leftover hours we have for our family? Maybe. And in some cases, there might be seasons of life where it has to be done that way. But I have on my calendar family time because that time is just as important, if not more important, than the time I put in for my business. And therefore, it should be protected. There creates a barrier around that time that protects me and my family time, just like how I try to create a barrier around the time where I have an interview so that people aren't knocking on my door, kind of thing, right? So the calendar is a really big part of that. And when you take a look at your calendar and honestly begin to ask yourself, like, how much are you valuing your family time in addition to the time that you're spending elsewhere? Like, well, then it should be reflected there, in my opinion. But maybe that's just me and how I need that on the calendar to stay disciplined enough to actually be there and show up in that way. With regards to the kids have always been quote unquote involved in what I do in the business. When they were younger, it was more conversations. And for example, if I was traveling somewhere, I would just be like, hey, daddy's peacing out. I'll be back in a couple of days. I would sit down with them and talk about where I was going to speak, who I was speaking to. I would test some of my jokes on them for the stage and kind of have them just, again, get involved. If they ever popped into the office while I was recording a podcast, I wouldn't be like, hey, don't come in here. I'd be like, okay, I'll chat with you in 30 minutes when I'm done. But then I'd bring them in. I'd show them what I was doing and why it was important that I have time with them specifically, or time with my guests specifically, so that they know why I kicked them out. Not just because I didn't want them there, but because it was important to have space. But then I'd put them on the microphone and record their voice and be like, see how cool it is to kind of listen to yourself here. Like,
what if I did it this way? That's funny, isn't it?
You can have fun with them and get them involved. And here, this is what this button does, just to kind of expand their curiosity. And one thing I've always done with them is always ask them, like, what lights you up? What excites you today? Not what did you do in school today? I never ask that question. And I also think it's an unfair question to ask a person what they want to be when they grow up. How in the world is a kid supposed to even know what is available to them? And things are going to change drastically. But again, to the value conversation, like, what lights you up? What are you interested in? That's how I can best know who my kid is, so that we can support that in some way, shape, or form, or with whatever they want to get involved with, make sure that's injected into it. So I think, again, like anything, like with my marriage, just open, honest conversation, check-ins. I treat the marriage like it is a business, not in that we're trying to make money from it, but I want everybody to be working collaboratively together and to understand who's doing what and why. And we have family meetings and we get excited about things. We plan for the future together. There's purpose behind the actions that are taken. And I think that's kind of maybe the overall big lesson here, is that with the actions you take and your intention to learn, have purpose behind it, not just live life in a more automated fashion, which we've all been trying. Like we've been in this mode for such a long time to automate everything. And I think we've overclocked on automation, where we're forgetting the important parts and the human parts of that. And kind of, there's a chapter in my book called Unautomate Everything, and kind of having a clean slate and then automating only the parts that you don't need and keeping and really holding on to the ones that you do.
What you were saying, particularly about when your kids might come into your office in the middle of doing something, reminds me of the journalist Oliver Berkman, who writes in his book Meditation for Mortals about how we think about distraction, right? And we think about, we need to stay completely focused on the topic at hand, and people coming in, like our kids, that's just a distraction from real life, when actually your kids are real life, right? And so you can get so fixated on your kind of productivity and that mentality of, well, I have to be doing this thing all the time, that you actually miss out on the real texture of life and these kind of important moments, and kind of looking up for a second. Yeah. So I think it seems so important.
It reminds me of that, I think it was a newscaster or journalist who was doing a live call, and then his kid walked into his bedroom behind him. And then the wife came in and was like trying to get the kid out. And this was all happening live. Yep. And he was just like trying to not get distracted. And it was such a relatable real life moment that it kind of went viral. And, it was handled in a funny way. But, in many cases, people would probably appreciate just like, hey, come on, kids, sit on my lap. Let's keep talking. Because that's just how life is, And I think as a creator, especially today, people want authenticity. People want real. there's so much fake out there. There's so much stuff that we don't even know is real or not. I saw a video the other day of a camera looking at the backside of a river and then a waterfall, and it looked so beautiful, but I was questioning whether or not that was real or not. Like, we don't even know what's real anymore. And so the more authentic you can show up and the more that you can become a human in this human world, the better and more value you'll have. And that's why, as far as my kids are concerned and what we're teaching them, yes, grades are important still. They give you opportunity, but more important than grades, in my opinion, are executive function. How well can you organize and support yourself? How well can you communicate and collaborate with other people? What are your problem solving skills like? How are you looking to find solutions for this thing that you've never been faced with before? These are the things that, in my opinion, employers will eventually want. They're going to want people to do the people things. And it's tough because a lot of people are buried into their devices or immediately going to ChatGPT to help them solve their problems and just kind of offloading any critical thinking now. And it's, again, for those of you who are doing that critical thinking and the human to human interactions, you're going to be much further ahead than most, I think, in the future.
One of the things we talk about on this podcast is the fact that shift happens a lot at work, whether we're at an office or, outside of one. So what do you do when shift happens at work?
First of all, you have to realize that you are probably not the first person in the world to have that shift happen to you. There are many other people who have gone through similar things, and that is reassuring. It's like, you're not alone. You're not, in fact, special in that moment, that like life is out there to get you or things are out there to get you. It's just a part of what happens. And if you can connect with other people who have gone through that before, it can be an amazing way to at least give yourself some breath back. A lot of times it feels like a gut punch and you just need to start breathing again. I remember how it felt like. So when I started to surround myself with other people who were also laid off in 2008, who were also trying to figure things out, even though we didn't know where we were going, we at least were doing it together. And I think that's where a community of peers, colleagues, and emotional support from friends and family can really come into play. And finding those people is going to be really key. Just a person to rant to, in some cases, can be a lot to release that pressure and get that breath back. The second thing is to ask yourself, and I got this from one of my mentors, Michael Hyatt, and that is this question: what does this make possible? If I hadn't gotten laid off, I wouldn't have found entrepreneurship and have built what I built and have more time with my family. And although I felt like at the time it was the literal worst thing that could ever happen to me, it actually, looking back, became such a huge blessing. But it was only a blessing because I eventually saw the opportunity that it gave me. For a while there, I was sitting in depression, but when I finally got connected with others and was shown other parts of the world there that I didn't know about before, my eyes opened up and so did those opportunities. So what does this make possible? That is a very, very important question in times of distress.
And it reminds me, when I was doing some reporting for my book, I talked to a therapist who invited me to consider, during kind of a painful moment of my life, a question that was something along the lines of, how could this painful thing be the best thing that ever happened to me? And at first I really pushed back and I thought, how could you ask that question? Right. And then I sat with it for a while. And I think it's a cousin to this question of what is possible or what can be made possible. And it kind of invites you to consider, if there are ways that this thing that feels like it's closing a door could actually be opening one.
Yeah.
So I love that. Well, Pat, I know we're at time. I wish I could keep asking you questions. You have such an interesting life experience, but wanted to thank you so much for joining us on Leading Up the Work Shift, and really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
That's all for this episode of Leading Up the Work Shift. Follow Leading Up the Work Shift on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and we might just read your review on the show. Check out courses that you need to upskill your own career at udemy.com. This podcast is produced by Udemy in partnership with Pod People. Until next time, keep leading up.